So last week, we started a brand new series called Can I Trust Jesus? And if you look underneath, it says The Secret to Gratitude. And that's what we're going to be looking at over the course of this series. This is the time of year because it's almost Thanksgiving. Look at that. You guys are sharp. So, yes, because it's almost Thanksgiving, this is the time of the year where most churches will dive into doing like a series about gratitude, which is really great. But I started thinking, what if we're kind of putting the cart before the horse? Because here's the reality. How can I practice gratitude if I don't have the foundation necessary for gratitude? How do I do that? And so here's what I wanted to do is over the course of this series, I wanted to do something that would allow us to begin to look at how do we build those elements of foundation in our lives so that we can it result in us becoming people of gratitude. Now, about last year, we did a devotional because what happens is every week we connect a weekly reading to the sermons. And so there was this one reading that we did last year that really kind of inspired me and it sparked some thought. And that really was kind of the foundation for this series. It was a reading that we did called Relentless Joy, a weekly reading we did called Relentless Joy. And so like that sparked some of the thoughts. And so this is going to come, kind of all that, out of that, the inspiration for that as well. So but here's what we did is last week, in order to talk about laying the foundation, we talked about what do we do when life is unfair? Because that's the reality. Many of us have said those 4 words, right? Life's not fair. We've said that. So we talked about that last week, and we looked at the foundation there. This week, what we're going to do is we're going to look at resistance and how we deal with resistance in our lives. And so part of it is we're going to walk through, there's a really great book of the Bible called Philippians. Well, they're kind of all great, but this is one of the great ones that I love as well. But in this, it's important for us to realize that when this book was written, Paul was in prison. So he had a very unique perspective in what it is that he's talking about. So, it's one thing when you talk to someone and they begin to give you encouragement and you're listening to them and you realize you ain't ever been through anything in your life, have you? And you're kind of like, oh, thank you, that's great, but you're not helping me at all. Well, Paul's not that guy. So when Paul does this writing in the book, it's called the Book of Philippians, when he does this writing, he's, again, writing it from being in prison. And so the words he has to say about how to navigate life in difficulties and impossibilities are pretty incredible. And so this week what I wanted to do is I wanted to look at another challenge. Sometimes it hinders us from being able to be people who are grateful, and that is resistance. Is when our life has resistance. And did you notice, here's what I think, and what I've noticed in America, and maybe you might agree with me, maybe you might not. But have you noticed that in America we tend to be what I would call resistance phobic? You know what I mean by that? Resistance phobic. So in other words, as soon as resistance starts to happen in our lives, we try to pray it out of our lives. Or as soon as resistance happens in our lives, we try to avoid it. Or, even worse, as soon as resistance happens in our lives, we quit. We give up. So this is important for us to kind of begin to dig in and look at. And here's the thing I've noticed. Well, I'm jumping ahead of myself. I'll get to that point in a minute. But as we look at this, here's the thing that I want us to understand. When it comes to resistance, typically what happens is we experience resistance when we decided to make some change in our lives. That's when we experience resistance the most. I mean, come on, have you ever noticed this? You decide you are going to eat well, right? I'm going to eat well. And then what happens is you show up at work, it's the company potluck, and there are 17 different kinds of cake, including your favorite, carrot, right? Or is that me? That's just me. Okay, all right. But including your favorite cake. And it's like, oh, or how about this? You decide, I'm going to quit smoking. And so you're doing really well, you're doing great, and then all of a sudden, like, your buddy turns to you and says, hey, would you like one? You're like, bruh, come on. So I mean, those kind of things tends to happen in our lives that whenever we decide to make change, and especially, and we're going to get to this in a minute, but especially when we decide to make spiritual changes in our lives that move us in a direction towards God and who he is, towards development, towards growth, towards implementing. I'm making all kinds of words up. But when it also comes to implementing God's work in our lives, God's movement in our lives, we will meet resistance. So the question becomes then, how do we respond to that? How do we react to that? And here's one of the things that resistance tells us, and you can see this right on the screen. Resistance tells us this, that progress is within reach. Progress is within reach. You wouldn't be getting resistance if it was impossible. But here's the thing. You might think, well, Ken, it seems impossible, but here's the thing that's really important for us to understand. Nothing is impossible with who? With God. So the question becomes, when it comes to resistance, are we trying to navigate resistance with his presence and his work in our lives, or are we trying to navigate resistance on our own? Because if we are trying to navigate resistance on our own, it is impossible. It is impossible. Because no one is better at getting in my own way than who? Me. Than me. So with God's power, God's presence, God's movement, that's what gives me the ability to begin to be able to push forward, to overcome some of those challenges that are in our lives. And it's really interesting this way because I think that this is so true. Would you guys agree we also fight a spiritual enemy? Right? His name is Satan. And I've said this in the past, and I fully believe this. Satan has no more power over your life than what it is that you allow him to have. Right? But with that in mind, when you are out there living as the world wants you to live, partying, having a good old time, cussing people out, showing up late, it doesn't matter. When you have these bad habits and you're driven by those bad habits in your life, Satan could care less about you. Could care less. But the moment you say, Jesus, I'm going to make a commitment, I'm going to live for you. I'm going to serve you. I'm going to give my life to you. And I'm going to begin to orchestrate my life in the direction that you have already declared. And this is really important, in the direction that you've already declared. Remember last week, we talked about this. We talked about the fact that, and you remember there's a puzzle in the back. So remember, we said last week that God has a completed picture of you. The moment that you say yes to Jesus, that picture is complete. But what's happening now is as you begin to trust in him, what he's starting to do is he's starting to put the pieces together so that those pieces will reflect the picture of what it is that he's created. But here's the thing. As soon as God starts putting pieces together, Satan's like, uh-oh. So you become a target of the enemy. Because he doesn't want to see you grow. He doesn't want to see you develop. More importantly, he doesn't want to see you being an influence for Jesus. And so if he can distract you by bringing in old habits, by bringing in old flames, by bringing in old challenges, he's going to bring that. So it hinders you from being able to progress and move forward. And all of those can be summed up in one word, resistance. He's going to bring resistance into your life to hinder you. So with that in mind, here's what I want to encourage you to be thinking about today. You can see this right on the screen. And that is, sometimes the things that push against you are actually pushing you forward. Let me say that again. Sometimes the things that push against you are actually pushing you forward. So as we look at this, when you go to work out at the gym and you're trying to build your muscle, do you remember what kind of training they have for you? It's called what? Resistance training. It is a resistance training that does what? That's what builds your muscles. And I wonder sometimes, because is it possible that when it comes to resistance, yes, it is true. We have a spiritual enemy that's going to try to hinder us from being able to move forward as well. But I also wonder that sometimes is it possible that maybe God is also taking us to resistance training? That once God realizes that, not really, he's already known. Once you realize, maybe I'll put it that way. Once you realize that, wow, I want to work on this area of my life and begin to change this area of my life, then what God says is, okay, great. You're ready to deal with it now. So here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to put you in situations that's going to cause you to have to deal with that area so that you can have some resistance training in your life so you can begin to progress and move forward. So the question becomes, well, how do we look at that resistance training? And this is where Paul comes in to play. Because again, we've said that Paul is where? He's in prison when he's writing this. And his imprisonment gives him a very unique perspective. And through this, his imprisonment speaks to us. So as we look at resistance today, here's what I want to encourage you to keep in mind. What was Paul's perspective when it came to resistance? And how can we take that same commitment in our lives and begin to have a right perspective when it comes to resistance as well? So here's what Paul said in Philippians chapter 1, verses 12 and 13. And I want you to know, my dear brothers and sisters, that everything that has happened to me here has helped to spread the good news. No, wait. Everything, my imprisonment, my unfair imprisonment has helped to spread the good news. For everyone here, including the whole palace guard, knows that I am in chains because of Christ. So here's the thing that's really interesting as we look at this passage. Here's what Paul is saying. And I really want you to pick up what he's putting down. He says he sees his imprisonment not as an obstacle, but as an opportunity. Not as an obstacle, but as an opportunity. So that's what's challenging him to be able to look forward to what's happening. And here's the beauty of this, because what happens sometimes with resistance and with life, it can cause us to play what I call small ball. And what small ball is when I get so caught up in what's in front of me that I can't see what's beyond me. Small ball is when I get so caught up in my circumstance that I can't see the purpose that it could create, that it could build, and it could move. Small ball is when I get so frustrated by what's in front of me that I lose faith in my Father and who He is. Small ball is what causes me to want to give up. Well, small ball is what causes me to quit. So this is what happens with resistance. So what Paul is saying is, look, he's not even looking at it as imprisonment. He's saying what this imprisonment has done is it has helped to advance the gospel. Now, realize when Paul is writing this, here's what's happened. He's falsely in prison, and there's this guy named Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus represents the church of Philippians. He comes to Paul, and he brings Paul a bunch of gifts to give to him from the church. And when he's there, Paul writes this letter to give back to Epaphroditus to take back to the church. Now, the beauty of this is as you look at it, is here's an opportunity for Paul, because here's what could have happened. Paul's imprisonment could have spelled defeat. It could have been spelled the defeat of the message, defeat of the movement. It could have spelled that. So what Paul does in writing this letter is he's saying, look, the gospel is still happening. It's still moving forward. Lives are still being changed. And it's beautiful because in this moment, what Paul, again, is able to do is to look beyond directly what's in front of him to see this. And this goes back to what we were saying last week as well. What he's able to do is he's able to look beyond his current circumstance and understand, here's the reality. God is at work. Even though I might not necessarily see them outside of this building where I'm imprisoned, I know God is at work, and I know the message is moving. I know the message is going forward. So that's the challenge for us, is when we meet resistance, is we cannot allow resistance to cause us to play small ball. That we have to begin to look at, and this is what I want to encourage you to do, is to sit down and begin to figure out, God, what's your vision for my life? What's your desire for me? And begin to explore that. And because what happens is when you understand that there's a greater purpose, a greater movement, a greater calling of your life, when you begin to recognize that, then what that does is that allows you to look beyond what it is that you're currently facing. And as a result of that, now you're able to play large ball, but you're able to look beyond the circumstances directly in front of you. So this is why it's so important. And so this is why here at Encounter, I speak about purpose a lot, and us being able to discover that and find that. Because it's for moments like this that when we do face something impossible, that we know, God, you're moving me somewhere. You're building me into something. And so I'm trusting you, and I'm trusting the work that you're doing in me to move me to that place that you desire for me to be. But it's important. So this is what Paul's able to do. He's saying, look, the gospel is still going out. And he says this in Philippians chapter 1, verse 14. He says, and because of my imprisonment, look at that, and because of my imprisonment, most of the believers here have gained confidence and boldly speak God's message without fear. So he's saying, my imprisonment has actually led to freedom. It's led to freedom for others. That they have decided, so my imprisonment has inspired others to step forward to fill the place where I couldn't fill. And so this is important for us to understand when it comes to resistance. Is the work that God desires to do is, although resistance may feel like you're losing something, although resistance may feel like you're captured by something, whenever there's something that's holding you back, that also means that's God loosening something up. That he's setting something free, that he's at the works to begin to move that. And so it's important for us to begin to dig so that we can figure out, God, okay, how are you moving? How are you working that will allow me to step into that? And again, here's one of the things that's so important for us to understand. And I've said this last week, I'll probably say this more in the series, is this is a point while he's in prison where Paul really could have turned inward. He would have. And the reality is no one would have blamed him for it. Because he would have reacted the same way that probably you and I would have reacted. He could have focused on his imprisonment. God, get me out of here. God, get me out of here. God, get me out of here. Pray that God gets me out of here. He could have focused on that. But he doesn't. He doesn't. Because, again, he recognizes that in this moment, God's releasing. And so maybe while we're in our resistance, instead of saying, God, get me out of here, God, get me out of here, maybe begin to ask, God, what are you releasing? Where is it that you desire for me to go? Where is it that you desire for me to step into? So that as a result of the work that you're doing in me, I begin to fulfill what it is you've called me to fulfill and do and be. What is it that you're releasing? And sometimes the very thing that he may be releasing is something that's happening in you. He may be releasing a mindset that you have, an attitude that you have, a habit that you have. And the reality is you would not have acknowledged that you have that attitude, mindset, or habit. You would have never acknowledged that if it were not for resistance. Resistance exposed it. So now the question is, what is it we're going to do with it? So Paul was able to look beyond his situation. And here's the thing that's really incredible as well. Is in this moment, if Paul would have turned inward and not cared about what happens with, I don't care what, they need to do whatever they need to do. Like, he could have gone in that direction. Then as a result of that, we never would have gotten the book of Philippians if he would have turned inwardly. And if we would have never gotten the book of Philippians, we would have never gotten some of the incredible nuggets that build faith that are in Philippians as well. I just want to read 3 examples to you. Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. Don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interest, but take interest in others too. Which is amazing when you think about it. He's writing this from prison. Prison would be the time that he should focus on his own interests. So he's demonstrating to them what he's doing. He also goes on to say in Philippians chapter 3, verse 14, I press on to reach the end of the race and receive the heavenly prize for which God, through Christ Jesus, is calling us. I press on. I don't care if I'm in prison. The handcuffs around my hand is not a handcuff around my soul. So I'm pressing on. Philippians 4, 6 and 7. Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about what? Pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank him for all he has done. Let me say it again. Tell God what you need and thank him for all he has done. Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. His peace will guard your hearts and minds as you live in Christ Jesus. I mean, those are some golden nuggets, right? And those are nuggets we never would have had if Paul would have turned inwardly. And so here's the thing as well that's important for us to understand, that yes, resistance is difficult. Yes, resistance is hard. But if we have the right perspective, maybe as we're battling through our resistance, maybe our lives can still begin to speak a message that will encourage others. Maybe our lives could be messages that inspire people, to remind them of that nugget. That Jesus is walking through this with me. He's present. And I trust in him, and I trust the work that he desires to do. So, again, one of the things that we love to do here at Encounter is when, for each sermon, is we connect a weekly reading plan to that sermon. And then what we'll do is, if you want to join us for that, you can go to our live stream. The link is there. If you use the QR code, go to our bulletin. You can click the link. You can get it that way. Also, if you join our GroupMe, we'll send out the link, through that, and you can join us that way as well. But for last week, we read one, and there was, and here's the reason why I want to encourage you to join us for them, is because you never know when God's going to use it to speak to you, to encourage you. And so there was something that we read last week that really stuck with me. And I thought, I'm going to use that in my sermon for Sunday. So you can see it right here on the screen. It says this: take your cues from Paul. If he prioritized self-preservation or personal agenda, he would have already lost. His situation would have rendered a devastating verdict. But with Christ as his priority, he couldn't lose. His vision thrived because Jesus was still alive and active in furthering his kingdom. Isn't that good? I mean, that is far better than anything that I could have said. That is gold right now that's worth you coming to this service. It's powerful when you begin to look at it from that perspective. So I also want to encourage you too. Don't lose the war when you haven't even started the battle. As we look at what God is at work and God is doing in us as we go through this process, the decision that we make to throw in the towel, to give up, to quit. Now, I also want to offer this caveat. Sometimes wisdom does dictate it's time for a change, right? Sometimes it does. So we need to be aware of that. But there are also times, well, I'll be honest with you. There are also times where I quit, and then the blessing showed up the next day. And I think, man, if I would have just been able to persevere and make it through this. So I just want to encourage us when it comes to resistance, that this is the work where God is doing. It goes on. He says this in Philippians chapter 1, verses 15 through 18. It's true that some are preaching out of jealousy. So remember, he says that there are people who are stepping forward and preaching right now. And he says, it is true that some are preaching out of jealousy and rivalry, but others are preaching about Christ with pure motives. They preach because they love me, for they know I have been appointed to defend the good news. Those others do not have pure motives as they preach about Christ. They preach with selfish ambition, not sincerely, intending to make my chains more painful to me. But that doesn't matter. That's powerful. But that doesn't matter. Whether their motives are false or genuine, the message about Christ is being preached either way. So I rejoice, and I will continue to rejoice. Their motives are terrible. And I don't know about you, but there have been times where I've been around people whose motives are terrible. Maybe their motive is to steal your thunder. Maybe their motive is to steal your credit. Maybe their motive is to steal your idea. Maybe their motive is to steal your opportunity. Paul said they saw me in prison and saw this as an opportunity to try to make me suffer. while I'm in prison. But instead, he says, even if they're preaching with the wrong motive, they're still preaching Christ. And even with the wrong motive, God still has the power to do what he needs to do because his purpose and his plan will go forward. So here's what I want to encourage us as well with resistance. Now, there are times where we do need to call people out. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And we need to be wise in the way that we do it. But what if our attitude became different? Let's say someone steals my idea and the company progresses. Well, hey, at least the company still progressed. And I'll deal with you for stealing my idea, and we'll talk about that. But hey, the company still progressed. So he's able, again, to celebrate and focus on what is the bigger picture. The gospel is still going forward. And so maybe it's time for us to make sure that I don't know about you, but I think that there are some times that I get so caught up in people that I forget the work. And I think that that's where sometimes the wrestle and the struggle comes in. So I want to encourage us to, again, hold on to the bigger picture. We'll deal with people in the meantime, and we'll deal with them in a way that honors Christ, but also progress is still happening. Growth is still happening. Transition is still happening. Celebrate that. Celebrate that. And that's what Paul is able to do in this moment. And I will tell you, sometimes resistance does come from the people that stand right in front of us. Sometimes resistance comes from the people we never thought we'd get resistance from. People that we thought would always be on our side. People that we thought would encourage us. People that we thought loved us. People that we thought understood us. People that we thought, oh, they know me. They know me. They know how I am. And then when you want to confront them, it's like, you know me, right? I don't know if we go with that pitch. You know? But it's like, you know me. So I don't understand why you came to this conclusion about me. So again, it's important for us to, as we look at being able to navigate the resistance that we see in front of us, to begin to continue to push forward. Going back to that study that I read last year that inspired this series, there was a statement that was made in it that I thought was really good. I wanted to read that to you guys as well. And you can see this right on the screen also. Sometimes the opposition, failure, lack, weakness, hurt, suffering, detours, and disappointment that we face in life are not signs that we are doing something wrong. As we are commonly led to believe. They're not signs that we need to stop or quit while we're ahead. Sometimes our suffering means we're doing life right. It's the very sign that we should keep going and keep fighting for our joy. So it's important for us to understand this too, that just because challenges happen, it doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong. It doesn't mean that. Sometimes you haven't had any challenges because you have been doing something wrong. So there was no need for challenges to happen in your life. And so now that you're starting to move in the right direction, because isn't that what we think sometimes? We start hitting resistance and we think, I'm doing something wrong. I've done something wrong. Unfortunately, churches have been guilty of this. Sometimes as churches, we've told people, you're not progressing because you have sin in your life. And sometimes that may be true, but sometimes it might not be true. And in the times where it's not true, we've done more damage than we have done good. So I think it's important for us, as we look at resistance that we're facing in our lives, that maybe, just maybe, it is a sign that we're actually moving in the right direction with our lives. And that's why this resistance has been allowed to progress and be a part of our challenge and what it is that we're going through and what it is that we are facing. So in Philippians chapter 1, verses 19 through 20, it says, "For I know that as you pray for me and the Spirit of Jesus Christ helps me, This will lead to my deliverance. For I fully expect and hope that I will never be ashamed, but I will continue to be bold for Christ as I have been in the past. And I trust that my life will bring honor to Christ, whether I what? Whether I live or die. I'm taking this class in seminary right now. And this class in seminary, it's called hermeneutics. And basically what hermeneutics is about, it's about learning how to break down certain passages to begin to look for words and try to find the meaning of the words. And as you're looking at the meaning of the words, hopefully what they begin to do is to communicate what is the author's intent of that passage. And so what was really interesting is, as I was looking through this, I looked at that word deliverance. And many times when we would read deliverance, we would think that he's talking about deliverance from prison, right? That this might be the opportunity. But then what happens is, and that's what I thought before too. That's what I used to think when I read this passage. But because of this class, it caused me to look at this passage differently, and then something stood out to me. He says, whether I live or die. So here's what that means. He's saying, he's talking about deliverance, whether he is set free from prison or deliverance whether he's still in prison. So if deliverance is not about getting out of prison, then what is deliverance about? What is it about? So I began to dig into this word, and here's what's really interesting about this word deliverance. Is the same Greek word that is used for deliverance is also connected to the same Greek word. They have the same root word as the Greek word for salvation. For salvation. Now, here's the thing that we know about our salvation. Can I save myself? No. No. As a matter of fact, it's like drowning, right? The more that I try to save myself, the further I go under. I cannot save myself. I can't. No matter how good I am, I cannot save myself. So the only thing that can save me is what? It's Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ. Christ crucified. So what this challenges me to do then is what you have to do is you have to lean on Christ for your salvation. So by Paul using the same root of this Greek word for salvation as he uses for deliverance, then here's what it's like, oh my goodness. Here's what is said to me. His deliverance is not being out of prison. His deliverance is further reliance on God. No matter what happens in his circumstance. That's his deliverance. And I wonder sometimes, how many times do we miss our own deliverance? Because we think, I got out of this problem. I've been delivered. My bills are paid. I've been delivered. My wife or my husband apologized. I've been delivered. No. Maybe you haven't. Because deliverance, according to this passage, here's what we recognize, is deliverance is not a change in my circumstance. Deliverance is a change in me. So it's God working and moving in me. And so when we begin to look at it from that perspective, here's what we can see on the screen as well. Paul's deliverance is a greater dependence on and recognition of God. Paul's deliverance is a greater dependence on and recognition of God. Because here's the reality. The conclusions that Paul came to, there's no way he would have been able to do it under his own strength. Impossible. God is his deliverance. And so if we're talking about building gratitude in our lives, then here's the point on how we can build gratitude. Gratitude results from relying more on God in troubles, not less. So what do I mean by that? Is sometimes when we start to go through troubles, we start to take responsibility on our own. The things that we should hand to God, we start trying to control and manipulate ourselves. And sometimes I see people even walk away from God because of the troubles that they're going through. So what this is telling us when it comes to gratitude, gratitude means that God, I'm depending upon you that much more. Depending on you that much more. And see, here's the thing. we tend to connect gratitude with happenings. And those happenings tend to be happy happenings. Then I'm grateful. God, I'm grateful that that check came. God, I'm grateful that my boss finally opened his eyes to my contributions at work, or her eyes to my contributions at work. God, so we connect that, and we connect that with gratitude. And part of it is, right, we should be grateful in that situation. But what I want to challenge us to do is have a gratitude that reflects faith. And when I can say, God, I'm thankful, and I know that you are good, but I have no idea this is going to work out. That's gratitude. Because now, you're not grateful for the change in your circumstance. You're now grateful for the presence of God. And that's the foundation that we need if we're going to be people who are really grateful. So here at Encounter, our core values are based off of the great commandment that Jesus gives. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength. Second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. So here at Encounter, we say love up for loving God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. We say love out for loving your neighbor, and love in for loving yourself. And so what we do is we take every message, and at the end of every message, we look at how can we bring one of those principles in to utilize in our lives. So based upon what we've learned today, for love up, use resistance to draw you to God, not away. Use resistance to draw you to God, not away. Love out. Always point people to the bigger picture. Always point people to the bigger picture. And that's why it's so important for us to have the bigger picture as well. And then love in. Focus on the growth you want to make, not the obstacle that stands in front of you. Focus on the growth that you want to make, not the obstacle that stands in front of you. Jesus, I thank you